America has become something of a faux pas. America is either too oppressive or too loose with immigration, and it's fallen out of fashion to say anything positive about this country. But today is America's 250th birthday, so I wanted to do something special and take a break from my usual critique of our culture and say some good things about our culture. To talk a little bit about why, as an immigrant kid, I am so grateful to call America my home. My name's Lisa, and you're watching Pens and Poison. So we're gonna have a little bit of story time today, and I want to tell you guys a little bit about my personal immigrant story. And I know that I'm not the only person who has a story like this, so I hope that everyone will find something to relate to, or at least to learn something about why America is so wonderful. And if you're convinced that America sucks, then I hope this story will change your mind. So let's dive in and start at my early childhood. So I'm the child of two Soviet immigrants who left everything behind so that I could have a better life in America. I grew up in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in Chicago, and until I went to school, I could only speak Russian. My apartment walls were plastered with Cyrillic letters all over the place, and I ran around reciting the Russian alphabet and memorizing Pushkin poems. I grew up on cartoons that the other kids on the playground had never heard of, and I listened to old Soviet songs that no one knew the words to. That might have been why I had a little bit of trouble relating to the other kids at preschool. See, I didn't speak their language very well, and they definitely didn't speak mine. I knew how to introduce myself, I knew how to count to 10, I knew the days of the week that my grandmother had taught me, which is kind of funny because my grandmother doesn't speak English very well, so she laughs today at the fact that there was ever a time where she taught me English. But back then, my grandmother was one of the few people who had the patience to teach a Russian girl English. The funny part was that I wasn't really a Russian girl. And by the time I hit kindergarten, those Cyrillic letters actually began to annoy me. The words that I was reading with my mom when she was teaching me how to read in Russian were very different from the words that we were reading at school. I was also taking French lessons, like every good little Russian girl, and I was very overwhelmed. I was reading in 3 different languages, and French was okay because the letters were at least the same as we had in English, and I didn't really want to read Russian because it was so much harder for me at the time to piece together those Cyrillic letters. So I think there was one day where I must have just stomped around the apartment and cried that I don't want to read Russian anymore because I was so overwhelmed. And my dad really quickly took my side. He told my mom, like, why does this girl need to know Russian? Our daughter is an American. And I was a little bit shocked, because up until then, I'd only heard the word American used as an insult in my house. See, in my household, the word American was synonymous with uncultured. If one of my friends didn't go to the symphony with me, it was because her parents were Amerikanцы. And if another one of my friends had potato chips for lunch, it was because her parents were Amerikanцы. And if another one of my friends played softball after school, it was because his parents were Amerikanцы. And as a kid, I thought that those Amerikanцы did some pretty weird things. Where I grew up in Chicago, they were always talking about some Cubs and some Sox. Didn't really know what that meant, and they got presents a week before I did. See, as a Soviet kid, I got presents on New Year's Eve rather than on Christmas, and Americans like to go outside without their hats and scarves, which was going to give them pneumonia. They also like to sit in front of the air conditioner all day, which was also going to give them pneumonia, and they didn't even wear slippers inside the house. The worst one was when you went to an airport and there was someone in a hoodie sitting on the floor. My grandmother had none of that. See, you were never supposed to sit on the floor. I remember how my grandmother would always shake her head whenever she saw anyone sitting on the floor in America. Would be like, oh, those Amerikanцы. Suffice it to say, I didn't really want to be one of those Amerikanцы. They seemed kind of lazy and uncultured and a little bit boorish. So growing up, I always told people that I was Russkaya, Russian, and that didn't seem to bother anyone. Kids at school didn't really like me anyway because we didn't really share any of the same interests, and I didn't really like them back. I had a Ukrainian best friend outside of school, and her parents were doctors, and we watched the same Soviet cartoons, and I had one person who made me feel understood. And the other place where I really felt understood as a kid was in Russian literature. There were people in those pages who understood my habits and my psyche better than any of the other kids at school. That might have been why I fell in love with literature as a whole, because there was someone always being misunderstood. So I became a voracious reader, and I finally picked up vocabulary words that I thought would allow me to properly communicate with the other kids in school. See, the problem was before I didn't know words like birdhouse or windowsill, so I felt excluded from the conversation. So I came into the 3rd grade with my new vocabulary after having read Tom Sawyer. And I realized that my misunderstanding problem wasn't going anywhere. See, the other 8-year-olds didn't really know what a pariah was, and they didn't want to hear about my travels around the world in 80 days with Phineas Fogg. They wanted to talk about the Krusty Krab and Nintendos and touchdowns. And so I was just as unintelligible as ever. So no offense to America, but I didn't really understand what made this place so special. American kids didn't stand a chance against me in multiplication tables because I had learned the Soviet way. And American grown-ups preferred Wrigley Field to the Lyric Opera. I really didn't want to be an American anymore. more. So one summer in high school, my parents had finally saved up enough money to send me on my first official vacation to Europe, and I went to London. All of a sudden, everyone was doing all the things that I had read about in all my favorite books. People were going to the ballet, and they were eating real food instead of hamburgers, and they were going to museums, and they dressed like normal humans rather than the homeless guy down the street. And I had fallen in love with Trafalgar Square and the Strand and the Globe Theatre, all these places that I had read about in literature, and I became convinced that I wanted to be a European. Back then, I really didn't understand what was so great about our life in America. I had this tiny 2-bedroom apartment. It had taken 15 years for my parents to afford to send me on a vacation, and in school, I was always learning about how the American dream was a lie and didn't exist. We read Ta-Nehisi Coates and James Baldwin, and all I had ever heard was that America was a racist and oppressive country, and that immigrant kids like me were always going to be at a disadvantage. I started to wonder if America was so mean and racist, and if all my favorite writers like Ernest Hemingway and T.S. Eliot had escaped America for Europe, then was America really that great to begin with? And why was I wasting all my time there? On the flight home, my mom said that if I really liked Europe so much, I could move there as an adult. So that was it. That was what I wanted to do. I was going to move to Europe. I had plans to apply to Oxford University, go study in England, and then become a European citizen. I didn't understand why America was so great and why I was spending all my time there. And if I hadn't missed that application deadline to Oxford, maybe I wouldn't be here anymore. Well, eventually I came to my senses. Not too long after my 17th birthday, I submitted an application to Columbia University. Now, Columbia is an Ivy League school, which meant that my chances of getting in as an immigrant kid were practically non-existent, at least according to my school homeroom teacher. He said that I didn't have enough community service projects like all the other American kids, and that I wasn't a billionaire kid, and that nobody got into the Ivy League without connections, and I had no connections because I was a random immigrant child. And my high school homeroom teacher was convinced that there was no way I was going to live out the American dream because the American dream didn't exist. My school told me that America had been rigged against me from the very start. But when I got my acceptance letter to Columbia, I started questioning that narrative. Was it really so difficult to get ahead as a random immigrant if I, a random immigrant with no money, no connections, and no extracurriculars, was going to get one of the best educations in the world? Well, Columbia ended up not being the amazing education that I thought it was going to be. You can learn more about that here, but in theory, the idea is wonderful, and it's an idea that is really, really unique to America. The ability for a no-name immigrant child to get one of the best educations in the world alongside the kids of presidents and celebrities and billionaires and make it in this world. In America, you had a fair chance to make it as an immigrant, even if you'd grown up in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment with no money and no connections. And I had grown up in that tiny 2-bedroom apartment writing corny novels and reading all the best books in the world, and I had dreams of my own. I wanted to become a famous writer, and suddenly it felt like my dreams weren't out of reach. My dreams weren't exclusionary like Ta-Nehisi Coates had told me. They were playing out right before my eyes. See, the Columbia English department might have sucked, but outside of the English department, my peers were getting internships at the White House. They were applying to medical school. They were writing screenplays. They were becoming models. They were starting companies. And suddenly it felt like I could do all of those things too. I wanted to create a world where no one was going to laugh at me for my big vocabulary and where I could connect with other people who felt really alone. I felt that somewhere along the way, maybe some other little girl was going to pick up one of my books and feel a little bit less alienated from the world. Maybe she'd feel like she'd belong amongst my stories like I once felt that I belonged amongst Pierre and Natasha and Andre. See, those books had gotten me through years of alienation, and I wanted to build on that tradition and make a difference in someone else's life too. And suddenly I felt like I could do it. In America, I could change the world too. I could move people with the same words that had once burdened me as a kid. I could move people with the English words that were the lifeblood of my stories and the words that form the language of my people, the Americans. So I started to think that maybe America was kind of cool. But it wasn't until my 21st birthday that I really fell in love with America and learned how much it had done for my family when they had been at their lowest point. On my 21st birthday, I learned why my parents had moved here in the first place and how much America had saved them. See, my mom took me to brunch one day and sat me down and told me that in 1991, my dad had gone to prison for being different. He was Jewish and he was framed right around the time that the Soviet Union was falling apart. And with a bunch of new autonomous countries, there was no set legal process. So he was just thrown into prison with no evidence just because he was a Jew. My dad sat in prison for 9 months before he got out briefly. And during that time, my grandparents had been in touch with the American government and had secured political asylum. My dad's family left behind everything they'd ever known and come to America with just $100 in their pockets. My dad fried potatoes at Burger King with a master's degree in engineering, and he supported his sister and his parents for a couple years while they were all living in a Jewish ghetto. After a couple years, my dad taught himself English, got his degrees verified, and got a job at IBM. He saved up enough money to marry my mom mom, bring her back to America, and buy that little 2-bedroom apartment I'd grown up in. And the best part was that in America, my dad was free and no one was going to go after him for being different. See, when I was growing up, I was always comparing that dumpy 2-bedroom apartment that I had grown up to the mansions that some of the other kids had, but I never realized that my dad had put his entire life savings into that tiny 2-bedroom apartment so that I could have a home. He saved enough money to send me to one of the best schools in Chicago where I got an education alongside our president's children, and many years later, he saw me off to another educational institution that had been good enough for our president. All of a sudden, all the things that had seemed pretty lame to me as a kid suddenly became amazing, miraculous even. It was really a miracle what you could do as a random immigrant to America. And suddenly I understood why my parents had given up everything back home so that they could give me the life I have today in America. It's truly a miracle that I'm lucky enough to hold a passport that lets me travel to almost any country in the world. And it's truly a miracle that I can pay for those travels with money I make on my own. And after those vacations, it's a miracle that I can come back to a home that encourages freedom and innovation, and that I can support myself with my business while I chase my dreams of becoming a famous writer. And the crazy thing is, I know that those dreams are gonna come true because I live in America. Guys, I've never believed in God, but I do believe in miracles. And I know that it's a miracle that out of all of the places that I could have been born on this planet, I was born in America, the greatest country on earth. I had the honor and the privilege to be the very first person in my family to call themselves an American. And I can't tell you guys how lucky I feel every morning that I get to wake up and live in the greatest country in the world. So yeah, I don't understand why Americans like to watch funny people run around with sticks hitting balls across the field. And I don't understand why those same people don't like going to the ballet, but that's okay, because the great thing about America is that everyone's so different. And I'll take air conditioners and water bottle caps that come all the way off and slop bowls and 24-hour supermarkets over British totalitarianism and Russian militarism. And I'll take all those things because I know the American dream is real. I am the American dream. Guys, it's so great to be here. America, here's to you. Happy 250th birthday. And here's to 250 more years of freedom, innovation, diversity, and the power to be anyone you want to be. America, your hamburgers are really crappy, but I'll love you forever. Happy birthday. Well, if you enjoyed this video from this very proud American, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and if you want a longer version of my story, it's over on my Substack, Pens and Poison. Don't forget to subscribe there as well. I'm also on Instagram, where I'm Pens and Poison, and on X, where you can find me at Pens and Poison. And if you're an immigrant kid too, I want to hear your story. Drop them in the comments, and have a lovely 4th of July.